ever considered buying a car without going online? And many of us now, and a few years from now, most of us would not consider going to a restaurant without checking its reviews. Would you go on a vacation without booking it almost entirely online? So what are the impact of all these things? Well, I think the impact is that we are going to have a major productivity boom from the digital age. We haven't seen that yet. The productivity boom from the PCs, which Alan Greenspan attributed to part of what he had kind of missed in terms of the growth potential that the US economy saw, took about 10 to 15 years to really emerge. Internet is a slightly different medium, and it kind of had its own boom. So it will take, I would suggest to you, longer than that, probably about 20 years. So if you think about kind of 95 or so as the beginning age of Internet, we still have some time, maybe 5 or 10 years more, before we can see this productivity boom that we will see now. And that will open up a lot of opportunities. And in a sense, that's kind of the glue that made me think these three areas, the digital age, the boomer market, the global village, all kind of connect together. We are just beginning to see these connections form, almost like an embryo in an infant's mind that's beginning to make some connections, and neurons are connecting here. And I think it's very exciting. It doesn't sound that sexy when you kind of describe it this way, but to me it's very exciting. So let me go on to my kind of four thoughts in here. First is that the whole concepts of generations and demographics, in my view, is changing and morphing. We had an interesting discussion at our table, actually, and I was listening carefully about how different terms over the years have been applied to different age groups. How were they perceived? Do we need new nomenclature for that? What I'm seeing is that the generation gap, if you could call it, is actually shrinking, if it hasn't been eliminated. The things that a 50 or a 60-year-old can do today or wants to do today are not that dramatically different from the things that a 20-year-old wants to do. And this was different 30 years ago. So it hasn't completely diminished, and it will never be completely diminished, but there are major differences in the two stages right now, of 30 years ago and now. And I think internet and digital age, as well as the broader social trends we have seen globally, have a lot to do with it. And some of the trends that I want to talk about actually have contributed to this, making this accessibility to these services possible and easy. Let me give you one example. Texting. Texting used to be what kids did. I mean, we made fun of it. It was inefficient, or it was waste of time. You just had to use little flip phones and find the keys in there and try to find the right combination and do text. But the kids would do it without thinking about it, and it worked for them very well. Texting now is becoming mainstream. And you mentioned about texting to me the other day. In fact, she did. Why? There are many reasons, but I think one major reason is this thing. iPhone. It made it easy. There you go. It made it easy, and it made it sensible. We shouldn't think of things as being easy because older people can't do things that are complicated. They're senseless. That's what we don't do it. I mean, why do we want to waste time going through 15 steps to find an address to a restaurant, which exactly is what we did. I did a report on mobile applications about 7 years ago when things were really hot, and industry analysts were saying there would be more mobile usage of internet than anything else. And I said, it takes about 15 steps to do it. Why do you want to waste your time? It's not a matter of whether it's complicated, I can do it or not, or my kids can do it. It's a waste of time. So with this, you can press one key and get your instructor course, and you can press one key and text. You don't need the code. So I think that these are some of the trends that have made the digital divide between the generations collapse. And it's an important trend to watch. We're just beginning to see it. Because not only people over 40, let's say, will be twittering and using Facebook, but they will find new ways to use those platforms and new applications for it. And they will feel more empowered, as they should be, because they are. And the internet and the digital age is giving them the tools for that. So that's really an important trend to watch. The second thing that I want to talk about is kind of move on to the global side and how the global village, to use a cliche, if you will, is really taking shape and is going to be an important part of what happens in the next 10, 20 years. And it was very interesting for me as kind of a student of what's going on globally to watch what happened in these different markets, particularly in China, India, and even in Vietnam and Dubai and other places, as we went into this global deep recession. I had an opportunity to do an Asian tour back in October, November of last year, which was right in the middle of kind of going through the worst periods. In fact, I had to call my broker and say, keep holding in cash, selling everything. Remember, I did from Hyderabad, I never really forget that. So it was interesting to see how people were reacting in different markets. So I went from US, and people were in just deep gloom. I mean, everything is dying. This is really terrible. We did terrible things. It's our own fault. We were too greedy and all that. And all of this is right. It's just that how people were feeling were really down. And I went to China and Dubai and India, and people were feeling really upbeat. No, we can do this. We can stand up to this problem. You know, we have the courses here. We have the market demands. Sure, our exports would be down quite a bit in China or in India, but we have our local demands. And sure enough, they're doing really well. I just had a call with one of my Indian contacts, and he said, the economy is really doing well. And I keep in touch in terms of what goes on in there. One of the interesting trends is that rural India, which in terms of population is about 85% of it, and in terms of GDP is like maybe 5%, is seeing enormous growth. I mean, you can't possibly see any sign of declining there. That is, the growth rates aren't even moderating, they're just growing. Sure, it is from a small base, but the point is that there is demand there. I was just reading the other day an article in the journal about kind of traveling salesman who goes to the villages and literally puts on a show. And who do you think the customers of this salesman are? They're not just some rice or other products out there. They're Motorola and Nokia and Johnson & Johnson and Unilever and these guys. But this is the way that you can reach those people, and it's working. So there were two interesting things that I noticed in the reaction of the developing worlds, the emerging economies, to the crisis which we had. And it was a huge crisis. I mean, who among us wasn't really deeply touched by the impact of it and almost panicked as to what's going on in the world? And there were two things. One was that we can weather this. And in fact, they did. To be accurate, there was even some over-optimism as to how they would not be impacted. In Dubai, for example, people thought that they would just go on growing, and they didn't. But they can weather it. And the second thing was that this is our century, that we have earned it, we can do it. This may be a small setback, but going forward is really what we should be looking at. And even though we're going to have some problem for the next couple of years, eventually this is going to be the century, or at least the next couple of decades, of the emerging worlds. I'll give you one example. What happened a few weeks ago. One of the very interesting brands of General Motors, Hummer car, was bought by a Chinese company. And not just any Chinese company, a relatively obscure kind of tractor and heavy equipment